morning, everybody. Welcome to episode 2. We're thrilled to have you with us today. So today is all about single venue in-person registration. So we've got quite a few things to cover. We won't be repeating things like Canvas designs, etc. from last month. I'll provide you a link though, so you can access some of that information. Let's jump in and have a look. So just some usual housekeeping things. As you're probably aware, we record the sessions. They will be available and you can access those on our blog. There is a Q&A function that you can access using the Zoom feature. So keep in mind, Q&A is available to everybody to see. So any questions you raise there, if you see something that someone else has asked, please feel free to upvote that particular comment as well. And if you need to ask something a little bit more privately, you can use the chat function and direct that to any member of the team here today. So who's with you? My name is Derek Bell, the Director of Customer Success and Marketing, and I'll be running today's session for you. And helping me is Matt Hemsley, our Marketing Manager, and Jason O'Donnell, one of our Account Directors. So they'll be assisting with Q&A as well. So give them a run for their money and make them work hard. So please get those questions in. All right, so let's have a look at the agenda then for today's session. So what I wanted to focus on was looking at, so keeping in mind we're now moving from a webinar webinar registration process like we did in episode 1. Here we're now physically at an in-person event. So the experience is a little different. The registration experience is not that different, but some of the other considerations and things we've got to share with you today could be a little bit different. So we'll look at a multi-channel registration process and what that might look like for you, essentially driving people to your registration page. We'll also look a bit closer at the form, because the form is really where a lot of the heavy lifting is done based on the information the person provides you at the point of registration. And that becomes particularly pertinent when we look at offering an RSVP function versus simply a register now type of function. Of course, using Eloqua landing pages to deliver that experience along with the Eloqua form is what we would advise and encourage you to do. And then also sometimes that poor country cousin of events being post-event campaigns. So let's look at ways to continue the engagement long after the last speaker has spoken. And then just a quick update, if we have time, on what's new and what's coming with release 20C. And most of us should almost be on 20C by now. So we'll jump into that. And as you know, Q&A is throughout. So please feel free to ask questions throughout the entire session. Okay, so let's jump in. First of all, a bit of a welcome and introduction. So today is all about trying to create an experience that is easy and simple for people and is somewhat elegant potentially in the way that they register. One thing that we always like to do is ask some questions at the point of registration. Now, of course, this is a webinar, not an in-person event, but fundamentally the same thing could be provided at any point of registration. So one of the questions that we like to ask is around your use of Eloqua. And here what we've done is captured that information and shared that back. Now, I've done this myself for many in-person events as well. So when you have people register for an in-person event, it can be sometimes really helpful. And I suppose people enjoy, they'd like to get a bit of a profile and understand who's in the room with them potentially. So you can ask the sort of questions and then present that information back. And you may have other data you could add to it to augment it potentially, but giving a little bit of information back, given the information people are giving you. So that's who's with us today. So the vast majority of people on the call today, over 150 different registrants, are looking to describe themselves. Well, we actually describe you as a power user based on your response that you use Eloqua every day. So we would easily refer to you as a power user from that point of view. So let's dive straight in and go straight to our multi-channel registration. So email obviously plays a big part in the process, but whether you choose to make the event or the registration process multi-channel or not will probably largely depend on your audience and who it is that you're inviting to your audience. So what I've tried to do here is break down what those audiences, that makeup of that audience might look like and the process that you might go through to invite them. So if we look at the first one, it could be a very targeted event. So this is probably a list that is put together by the sales team or by whomever has requested marketing run the event, obviously, but it's very much an invitation-only exercise. And so email may be part of it, but there'd probably be also some pretty intensive, telephone campaigns by account directors and others, or whoever owns the relationship, to reach out to those individuals and invite them to come along. Other types of invitation processes could be that they're still targeted, but you may encourage the individual to bring a colleague along, or their partner, or whoever it may be. Slightly different to the first one, but the point being with this second one, that it's possible that you'll end up with a group of people who were not known to you previously, as in they weren't in Eloqua or the CRM potentially. So they're potentially net new additions to your database. And so we need to understand how to manage that process. And then finally, the last one could be where you may target a core group of individuals and actually have them act as your influencers, where it's not just email invitations, but you may also then encourage them to share the event via social. Now, in this case, we've just focused on LinkedIn and Facebook, but of course it could be any social platform. It doesn't really matter. But it really will depend on the size of the event that you're running as to, I suppose, which approach that you would necessarily take. We'll focus probably more so on the first two scenarios for today. And next month, when we look at episode 3, we'll be looking at larger conference style events. And that probably that third option is most applicable then from a large conference type of event. All right, let's take these few points and drill down. So let's break it down. So we have emails, and again, I focused on LinkedIn and Facebook, largely because they're the two that we have the connectors in. So if you're running paid advertising, then you can have those come in. But of course, you can drop a link in any social platform, driving people to an Eloqua registration page. The advantage with those two constructs is that you're able to present them with a registration form within the social environment. So within LinkedIn, within Facebook, they can stay within that environment. They can use their social profiles to complete the registration form. Now, that form is not going to be as intelligent as a form that you could deliver using Eloqua, but it may just get that baseline information that you need in order for them to register. Now, it would probably be counterintuitive to try and even entertain doing RSVP via that social platform. It would simply be a register now process, keeping in mind that's paid advertising that you're doing, okay? So if you are doing RSVP, well, that would probably then, you need to segment your database a little bit and have a slightly different experience. But if we're just wanting to provide hyperlinks potentially from those social platforms, which would then drive them directly to an Eloqua landing page, this is now no longer a paid advertisement within LinkedIn or Facebook. It's just simply a URL to drive people through. So we bring them all to an Eloqua landing page and form. And certainly for those people from email, they're known entities. So there's all sorts of easy things that can happen, like form pre-population and those sorts of things. And then we can send a confirmation email, and the exact same experience from a LinkedIn and Facebook point of view. And don't forget, I want to include some attribution there as well, so that after the event is done and dusted, you're able to have a look at your form submission data and understand where and who was leading the race, I suppose, in relation to delivering the best number of registrants to your event. So what does that look like in Eloqua? So it looks a little bit like this, and every campaign canvas will be a little bit different, of course. But here we have your Eloqua contacts. And if you were running a paid advertisement within LinkedIn and Facebook, then you potentially could have the two feeders like so, coming directly onto your canvas and using Eloqua to then send the confirmation email. And then everybody would then stream in together, both your Eloqua contacts as well as your social or your paid advertising contacts would all fall into the same campaign, and then they slip into the reminder stage. So getting their first reminder, second reminder, those sorts of things to actually attend the event. So that's one way to play with your social or your multi-channel approach. So it's Eloqua, it's social. Of course, don't forget, obviously you can add links to your website. You may have a calendar on the website with certain events, keeping that up to date and driving people through. There are a whole range of ways that you can obviously get people to get to your Eloqua landing page to register. The key thing you want to think about is probably the attribution though, so that you can measure that each time. So when the event is done and dusted, you can then look and say, okay, well, Eloqua delivered X number of registrants, the website delivered X number of registrants, and social delivered X number of registrants. Okay, so Mon, you're thinking a little bit too hard. I just simply was trying to get so Mon says, we're not sending confirmation emails to the Eloqua segment. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. This technically speaking, you could say this would be from a form. Okay, so yeah, I was really just trying to highlight this piece here on the right-hand side. So, but I can't go from the segment directly to a confirmation email. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, don't overthink that particular canvas. So again, the emphasis here is on the social side of things, bringing those people in to send a confirmation email. Okay, so now that we've sort of targeted our audience, I suppose, and we're driving them to a registration experience, what is that registration experience going to do, and how's it going to work necessarily? So the thing that we promised last month in episode 1 was that we would talk a little bit about RSVP, which we will do here shortly. But that becomes the key thing, and the key thing that you need to figure out earlier rather than later. So don't be halfway through your process and think, oh, let's ask them to RSVP, because that's going to fundamentally change the nature of your form and the way your form works and how you do things. So you need to make that decision very early in relation to how you're going to do it. Are you simply asking people to register for your event, or are you asking them to RSVP? That's the first thing to think. The other thing to think about as well is catering. Now that we're sort of in an in-person environment, will there be catering? And if there is catering, do you need to ask for dietary requirements? Very simple thing to do, but there's a nice way to do it that can make your life a little bit easier, and also make life a bit easier for your venue as well. So I thought maybe putting a little bit of a checklist together, checklist considerations, however you want to think about it. But these would be some of the key questions I think you need to reflect on before you start to then design the experience using the campaign canvas. So the first one again is that register or RSVP. How many invitations will you send? For the purposes of language, I refer to first, second, and third invitations. I don't refer to first invitation and then reminders. I just find the language gets too confusing with all the various assets. So reminders are only sent to people who have registered, and invitation 1, 2, and 3 are sent to people who have not yet registered. So how many invitations, how many rounds of invitations will you have going through the process? And keeping in mind, I mean, every month for the user group, for example, we build 3 invitation emails, but any individual will only ever get 2. So it's just that the second one is slightly different depending on how you engaged with the first one. For example, that's with the webinar. Now, I have some customers who like to do up to many as 4 or 5 invitations and manipulate those experiences based on people's past engagement, etc. Some cases that works fine for them. Others, it's more about getting one out the door and then potentially following up with phone calls. So it really depends on your model of engagement and how you want to engage or communicate with people. So will those invitations be sent from the company or from a person? So are they simply coming from the brand? Or will they be personalized using something like signature function within Eloqua? Now, do you need to capture dietary requirements? That will depend, of course, if there's catering. So simply a field on the form, that's quite easy. Are you inviting people to submit a question when they register? Just a thought for you. Now, there are all sorts of really fun things you can do here, right? So if this is a breakfast event, for example, why don't you offer them to tell you what their favorite coffee is? Or maybe they're a juice drinker. So working with your venue, you can then have all of these things ready. You know exactly what their order is. Maybe you pop that order onto a name tag. It's a cappuccino or a latte or an orange juice, whatever it might be. So then the wait staff can, present certain things to these individuals, etc. So there are all sorts of fun ways that you can ask some questions up front that can just help provide a little bit of a fun experience when people physically arrive at the venue. Are you offering SMS and text reminders? If you are, then obviously we need to make sure we have mobile phone numbers captured as well. And how many reminder emails will you send? So again, remember the reminders in my books are sent to people who have actually registered. So they'll receive their confirmation email. And then from a reminder point of view, what do you want to do? Do you want to send one or two. It's probably going to depend on your timeline as to what makes sense. We used to, well, certainly for the user group, you'll find that we send you a reminder probably 4 or 5 days before, then we send you one about an hour before. And if you requested an SMS, you'll also get an SMS an hour before. And in that SMS, we direct you back to the email. Now, for in-person events, we like to have a little bit of fun with this one, especially depending on if it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, right? So if it's a breakfast event, certainly reminders late in the day before are a great idea. If you're doing a lunch is always the hard one, right? Because people have got to the office. So now you've got to get them out of the office, over to your venue, enjoy the day, and then up to them whether or not they go back, of course, but getting them out of the office. So sometimes it's a combination. If you've got the ability to send an SMS reminder, that could be really helpful because it could be a cut through. If they're already buried in email, SMS can be a great way just to grab their attention, say, hey, look, it's an hour out. You know, the drinks are on ice, the chef's preparing lunch, etc. We look forward to seeing you. All of those sort of things to entice people to, get up out of the chair and head over to your venue, jump in an Uber or whatever it might be. Then will you be inviting feedback from attendees about the event? So probably a little bit more into the post-event comm space. But again, we can use Eloqua to help with that. So let's keep going. So last month, we talked about a number of different ideas in relation to canvases, being the actual campaign canvas within Eloqua, and some benefits to dividing up those canvases. So the first one, and this would be exactly the same for an in-person event, I would suggest to you. So it would be first one, sends out the invitations. And I've got webinar there, but that's not necessarily the case. But then registration forms. So registration, we push them to the Eloqua landing page with the registration form. So again, doesn't matter where they're coming from, email, social, your website, wherever. And then we can use the form. And this is, again, is something that people sometimes stumble up on, is we use the form to send the confirmation email. We don't need to push them onto the campaign canvas to do that. So we can use the form to send the confirmation email. The only reason you may want to push them onto a canvas and have a canvas send the confirmation email is if, for example, they've come in from social, like you saw through those paid advertisements that I showed you on that canvas earlier. So we use the canvas to do that. If you wanted to apply a signature rule to an email, or a confirmation email, you will need to do that from the canvas because we can't do that from the form. I would suggest to you that using the personalization right down to the signature level for events is probably a little bit of an overkill for a confirmation email. I think you want to save that for invitations and other more important types of comms. Then the reminder canvas. So again, looking at sending reminders, so SMS reminders. You may also want to play around with external activities, attendees and no-shows. We can use that same canvas to capture that information. Now, being an in-person event, obviously, we need to upload that manually. We need to tell Eloqua who actually attended and who was a no-show. Now, if you missed any of that information from episode 1 last month, go ahead and scan the QR code that you can see on the screen right now. That'll take you to our blog post. So you can access the replay and also some examples of different canvases to work on that for yourself. Okay, linking the various pieces together. So let's have a look. So we've got our first campaign canvas, which will send out the invitations. And generally I find this has more to do with general busyness than anything else. In order to launch your campaign canvas, as you know, you must have all of the assets built and ready to go. And sometimes in the scheme of busyness, we don't have everything ready. So if we've got the registration page built and the confirmation email, and we've got the invitation emails ready, let's launch, let's get that out the door, because the reminders won't happen until a few weeks away, depending on your timeline, but it could be a couple of weeks away. So that gives you some time to build out the reminder emails to people in particular on a separate campaign. So registration is captured by Eloqua. And now let's have a look at this RSVP process. So when you present that concept of RSVP from a registration process, fundamentally what we need to do is capture a yes or a no response. Or if you want to be really geeky, you might say a 1 and a 0. I find 1 and 0 doesn't really work. Some people forget which one's which. So yes or no is just generally a lot easier. Once the person submits their RSVP as no, what we can then do, and this is usually one of the primary reasons people like to do this, is that they can then exclude those people from subsequent invitations. So if they've taken the time to say, look, no, I can't attend, or no, I can't make it, then we don't need to continue sending them invitations to attend. Okay, that's largely why people like to do this. Otherwise, it's around catering requirements and those sorts of things. Now, the key thing that we'll need to do in the form is to play with the conditional values. And I'll show you those here in a moment. That's the form that keeps popping up on my screen. I'll show you that here in just a moment. But the conditional values is on the form processing steps is what will help you manage that RSVP process, because it'll be conditional based on a yes or no response as to what happens to that person and where we move them in the context of the campaign. So you might remember this graphic from episode 1 last month. So this is primarily what we focused on for a webinar, which is basically an email with a link that says register, driving people to a page where they submit and they reach a confirmation page. Game over. Pretty simple. And you may choose to do exactly the same thing for an in-person event. If people don't want to come, they just simply won't register. Simple as that. However, if you wanted to do RSVP, then there are a couple of ways to do it. There's option A and also option B. My recommendation to you would be to work with option B. It does require a little bit more work, but I think it delivers a much better experience. So the difference between A and B in this scenario is that the ability to provide the RSVP, so the yes or no response, is actually in the email itself versus having to bring them to, in option A, they have to come to a form, fill in a form to say, no, I can't come, which is just a bit clumsy, right? So the purpose of option B is if the person does click no in the email, we actually submit the form on their behalf using a blind form. And so they would reach an RSVP no confirmation page, which can still be personalized. Let's not make it generic, let's personalize it. You're using Eloqua, so let's personalize it. So at least that RSVP no confirmation page can say, thank you very much, Derek. We appreciate you letting us know you're unable to make this event. Have a great week. You may want to include some things or links to other pieces of information that could be relevant to the topic, potentially, that may also capture their interest. I'd suggest to you there's probably no need to send an email. I think sending an email to let someone know that they told you no is probably a little bit of overkill and probably not necessary. So that would be an RSVP no experience. However, for the RSVP yes person, they come through and they reach the registration page, and it will largely pre-populate based on what you know about them already. And of course, we can present a whole range of questions and different things to those people at that particular point. And then, of course, sending them a confirmation email. We're going to focus on option B, and we'll have a closer look at that here in just a moment. Let's jump in and have a look at a form. Okay, so essentially at the front end of the form, you'll have a whole range of questions that would be standard for your organization. But the key one is this one, which is asking people to RSVP. So the way that you do that essentially is you would grab a single pick list and drag a single pick list in like so. Once you select on list, you probably have, like we do, we have yes or no, essentially, which is something that we can add. So say yes or no, like so, and select and add it to the list like that. Now, there are a couple of ways. This one here, we've tailored it a little bit. So this is what the person sees, which is referred to as the display name, but the value, you notice, is a simple yes or no. That's it. So yes, I'll be attending, or no, I can't make it. That's, as I said, depends on how you do it. In the scenario where we're looking at option B, then this question becomes irrelevant. You don't need to ask this question because the only people reaching the form are the people who have actually said, yes, I'm attending. But if you choose to do it the other way, then you need to have a play with this sort of information. Okay, so those values are really important because it's the values that then drive the experience on the processing steps of the form. Now, again, if you're simply using option B and the only people reaching the form are those who are saying yes, you won't need to bother with the no options because everybody here is saying yes. However, if you're going to use the form to enable people to say yes or no, that's where the conditional steps come into place. So the conditional steps basically drive you drive where you place that individual across your different assets that you're going to use. So there'll be shared lists involved. They'll obviously be sending the right sort of emails, adding them to the campaign and those sorts of things. So if we're adding people to a shared contact list, we can place a condition on it. And the condition is based on a form field. And the form field in this context is RSVP. So please RSVP is like so. This is the critical part here. So that you see right there must be the value from the pick list. So let me just take you back. So if we go back here to the form, here's our RSVP. When I look at the actual values, we have display name and we have the value. And it's the value that will drive the selection or the conditional options in the form. So this is standard right across Eloqua forms. It's always the value that you need from a pick list in order to drive something. If you think about next month we're focusing on multi-city events. So you might have Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Canberra, Perth. And so what you will do is have values for each of those different cities. And then based on those different values, that's probably what's going to drive people to relevant confirmation pages, making sure that they get the Brisbane confirmation email, which is to the Brisbane Marriott Hotel, and here's some pictures of the Marriott, all that sort of stuff. So the values are really important. My advice to you is to always keep them simple. So because they need to be exact. So for instance, when you create a pick list, and if you type in yes, comma, I'll be attending, and you hit tab, Eloqua by default will copy this information over here for you, which is, feels nice, right? Which in some cases is fine, but when it can get a little bit complex, you want to make sure that it's just nice and simple. So a simple yes and a simple no, that's it. Okay, so again, back in here, and you'll see that there's other pieces here as well. So what I'm doing here is, in this case, if someone has said no, again, there's a conditional step, and the conditional step in this case is no. So what I'm going to end up with is two shared lists, one that contains everyone that said yes, one that contains everyone that said no. The other one that you can add, which I find incredibly helpful in this scenario, is all RSVPs. The reason for that is that on the campaign canvas, depending on how you're doing things, again, it will vary for everybody, but what you're trying to avoid is having to go, did they say yes? Yes or no? Did they say no? Yes or no? Okay. So we're early on in your events and your issuing of the different invitations to people is, at this point, you don't care if they said yes or no. It's only if the fact that they did say yes or no. So let's drop them into a single shared list, and we can do that. It's only until you get to the reminder portion of your campaign that you need to have absolute clarity around who actually said yes. So then we can refer to the shared list called yes. So any questions on those processing steps and helping from an RSVP point of view? As I said, it will differ. There's a few different ways. If you run with option A or option B, the form will need to be different. And if you run with option B, we need two forms. We need the form that covers yes, and then we need the blind form, which will be for the no's. What we're looking at here is the option A scenario, which is where the form is actually capturing yes or no. So you've got some options to play with there. Okay, so just to recap on those points. So shared lists, you're going to need one to cover all responses, one to cover yeses, one to cover nos. The requested SMS, again, that will depend. That's the only reason that's in italics. It will depend on whether or not you're offering that as an option to people. Then landing pages, you're probably, regardless of whether you do option A or B, you'll still need two pages, one for yes and one for no. You could think about that RSVP no page. You could actually make that generic. There's no reason perhaps why you would need to have an RSVP no page built for every single event that you're running, because remember, the page can be personalized, so it can still carry information and be like, thank you, Derek, for taking the time to tell us you're unable to make it. You may find some of this information of value. You might put links to your blog and other bits and pieces on there, but there's no reason why that page couldn't be generic from your point of view, but still personalized from the person that you're talking to. And then from an email asset point of view, it's invitations, it's reminders, it's confirmation emails, and then also thinking about your post-event comms for those who have attended versus the no-shows and what that could look like. So that would be a high-level view of those. Now, linking it all together. So first campaign canvas sends out your invitations. Then the registrations are captured in Eloqua using the Eloqua form and landing page. Then we use the Eloqua form to send a confirmation email to people. And then we push everybody onto a second campaign canvas, which is where we'll issue the reminders to people. Okay, so some of the things we want to think about here now is our actual event, our physical event is now getting closer. We've got our second campaign canvas sending out reminder emails, potentially SMS reminders as well. So now we want to sort of move our thinking to the day of the event. And what does that look like? So we've got to think about the check-in experience. When people arrive at the desk, are they going to be greeted with name tags, or how's it going to work? And it probably will depend on the size of the event, I suppose, as to what you might do. There's some things to consider in relation to this process. And just some ideas that we wanted to share with you that you may or may not have thought about. So you've got things like manual check-in lists. Now we can always take form submission data from Eloqua, export that to Excel, turn it into a little checklist, etc. Check people off as they come in. You may take that information from your form submission data to send off to the team to help produce the name tags. So you've got the name tags all laid out. And of course, we'd all played that game. Once everybody's seated, somebody takes a photograph of the remaining name tags, they become no-shows, etc. So there's all sorts of ways to do that. You've also got walk-ins to consider, and it will depend, of course, on your type of event. It may be that you don't allow walk-ins, but walk-ins happen. And by walk-ins, we mean somebody who just simply shows up with a colleague potentially, but didn't actually register for the event. So how do you want to manage that process? Is automating check-in something that you might want to consider? Do you have Wi-Fi? Okay, so most hotels will offer you Wi-Fi. It's pretty easy these days to find Wi-Fi, but just in case, just something to think about. So something that we wanted to share with you is something that we've helped a few clients with recently, is this notion of using a QR code to do check-in. So the way this would work essentially is that people may walk up to a registration desk and you will still have their name tags potentially there, but you may invite them to actually scan a QR code to check in. Now, from an Eloqua point of view, remember when you build a form in Eloqua, the only required value that you must have on any form in Eloqua is the email address. Now, at this particular point, given people have arrived, you already know who they are, but you want to capture the fact that they're there, then why not present them potentially with a check-in capability where they can simply scan the code, pop in their email address, and then reach a confirmation page. So then the beauty of that is in the back end, we can automatically drop people into respective shared lists, letting you know exactly who's arrived on the day, potentially keep some more robust record of who's arrived. And again, it will probably depend on the size. Like if you're having an event with 20 or 30 people, this could be a little bit of overkill. But if you're looking at an event where maybe you've got 200 or 300 people in a room for an event, you only need 30 or 40 of those people to all pop out of the elevators all at once to feel a little bit overwhelmed in relation to trying to have everything move smoothly. But if you had QR codes popped up everywhere around the lobby as people arrive, then they can simply check in. Now, the other upside to this type of check-in process is that we certainly see from a COVID safe venue point of view and all those sorts of things, there's a bit of an onus on organizations to ensure they have record of who attended these different events. So it could also serve to help you from a check-in point of view and being a COVID safe friendly event and all those sorts of fun things as well. So very simple to do. All this is an Eloqua landing page with a form on it. And that form, as I said, may simply just be an email address. And that's it. And you just produce your QR code. Now, at the back end of that, you can automate all sorts of things, external activity creation, et cetera, all those sorts of things can be built in. So a nice, simple, elegant way to do things. So let's look at the registration experience on a landing page and things to think about. So it's really interesting, Eloqua uses globally actually create more landing pages than they do emails. Would you have imagined? I got that information from one of the Oracle product guys at a conference we went to in the US a couple of years ago. And I was honestly surprised by the stat, but he said, yeah, it's consistently been the case. There are many advantages to using Eloqua landing pages over the CMS or potentially other platforms. So the big ones are the fact that the form can pre-populate. So we know who these people are. Let's not ask them again for their first name and last name. We know who they are. We probably know their job title. We probably know a few other bits and pieces. So let's use it as an opportunity to maximize using progressive profiling to actually ask some questions that we don't already know the answers to. So let's be smarter in relation to the way we deliver it. The other nice thing about using the Eloqua landing page is the ease of being able to deliver dynamic content. So dynamic content means that you're able to adjust imagery, you can adjust copy, you can really hyper-personalize that page based on the person's industry, their seniority, their job role, their job function, whatever it may be, whatever underlying data you have, you can use that information to present some dynamic content to really hyper-personalize that whole registration experience. And the attribution becomes a lot easier as well. So we talked earlier about the multi-channel registration process. So if you've got people sitting across, from emails and LinkedIn and different social platforms and the website, providing unique links across each of those with all the UTM values in place means that the form can capture that information. Then at the end of the event, you can see exactly which channel was the most effective in converting people to register for the event. If you missed last month, just to give you an example of one sort of microsite, scan this one. So this one takes you to our webinar replay library. Now, depending on the size of your organization, you may do video recording at your in-person events. And so having some sort of a way to showcase what those events can look like could be nicely hosted on an Eloqua landing page, for example. Again, you can include all sorts of personalization in there as well, but whether it's webinar replays or whether it's information about in-person events, it could be about sharing photographs, or maybe social is probably better for sharing photos. But yeah, have a look at that as just one example. So then we move on to post-event. So now our event has actually taken place and it's time to start thinking about how we continue the process. A couple of ways you can do this, right? And one of the first things that people often ask us is in relation to evaluations. I find many years ago working in an organization where we did a lot of training and the emphasis on evaluations was just ridiculous. It was through the roof. And we used to call them smiley sheets, but at the end of the day, it can often come down to, is it a thumb up or a thumb down? Essentially, that's kind of it. Versus your rating scales, you may do rating scales from 1 to 5, etc. But if you were to potentially have QR codes sitting on the tables at your event, people could potentially provide feedback at a time that was comfortable for them. You can have it there available for them on the day, but you may also then want to think about getting information to them via email in a post-event scenario. So in this example here, this email potentially could go out to your attendees where all they have to do is click on a thumb up or a thumb down. And so what's happening in the back end there is a single form that is capturing the yes or no, or I suppose it's binary, 0, 1, whatever you want to call it, whatever value works for you, which can then be, and there's no reason why that really needs to be or there's no reason why it couldn't really just be a single evaluation form that you use on every single event, because every submission will be date and time stamped, so you know which one it's in relation to. Plus, from an attribution point of view, you'll be able to use things like lead medium or lead campaign, which will show you the relevant email the person clicked on in order to reach this page. So you don't have to create an evaluation form for every single event. You could have a single form that is used across all of your events, and it's a standard process where the email obviously will be tailored and be personalized and talk about the event the person attended, but their feedback could be very easily captured through a single form in that process. Now, here we've shown you a thumbs up and thumbs down scenario. You could also change that to a rating scale, maybe 1 to 5. That could be another way to do it. You could, with the 1 to 5, or even with the thumbs down, for example, if they said thumbs up, you could take them to a page saying, thank you so much for your feedback. Have a lovely day. If they did a thumbs down, you could potentially take them to an alternate page, which says, look, we really appreciate your feedback. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Okay, so same sort of scenario with your scale from 1 to 5. If 1 is terrible, it was a disaster, versus 5, I can't wait for the next event, then maybe if anyone clicks on 1, 2, maybe 3, you take them to a page where you invite additional feedback, versus anyone that clicks on 4 or 5, go straight through to the, hey, thanks so much, we love seeing you, can't wait to see you at the next event type of scenario. Okay, so evaluations can be an important part of the process. And again, you can build in some assets that are largely repeatable that you can use again and again, delivering a consistent experience. But now that we're at the end of the event, let's not forget about these post-event comms. Let's not lose the momentum that you've built, and let's not lose the opportunity to record attendance at these various events. Thinking about dividing up the comms between attended and no-shows. I recently registered for a webinar series. I think it was 5 webinars with a large European software company. I plan to watch them, but when I have some time, and I just don't have time to watch them right now. So every few days I'd get these emails in saying, thanks so much for joining us. I'm like, I haven't joined you. Every few days they'd come in, because I assume it was pre-recorded, I'm not sure. But then by the time the 6th one came around, the series had wrapped up, and the communication was, thanks so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the content, etc. I'm like, I haven't watched anything. I mean, surely you know that I haven't watched anything. Why on earth are you sending me emails assuming that I've watched it? I mean, to me, that's just naff. I mean, that is basic stuff. Okay, if we can't even get that right, that's so. We're smart enough. We have the ability. We know who attended. We know who were the no-show, especially in an in-person event. We have to have absolute clarity as to who was physically there and who wasn't. So then think about external activities. So you can use external activities within Eloqua to record that. And the nice thing is with an external activity is you can later create a segment by it as to who attended and who was a no-show. You may also want to think about adding people to shared lists, because you can also then incorporate that into lead scoring as well if you wanted to do that. I strongly encourage you to communicate with people based on their attendance. Don't just generically go back to people with vague language. You know they were there. Talk to them like you were sending them an individual one-on-one email. Let them know that you know that they were there and you appreciate them making some time to be there. Now, if you did record anything at the event, any sort of footage, everyone's got a smartphone these days, and we can, pretty high quality video that we can produce. You think about making just a little snippet video, a couple of highlights, highlight reel, for instance, to share as well. It becomes great content. So when it comes to those 2 groups of those who attended and those who were no-shows, you may want to think about slightly different experiences. So one thing that we often do at Marketing Cube, not every single time, but often do, is if you attended, we'll typically send you straight through to the keeper and you can access whatever it is that we did together and you participated in. However, if you're a no-show, we're probably going to make you go through a form to give us a little bit more profile information in order to get to the content that's on offer, okay? So simply registering and then being a no-show doesn't guarantee that you're simply going to get what you missed. That's how we choose to do things. You may choose to do things a little bit differently. Use your blog. I think the blog is a great tool to summarize events, whether they be webinars like we do, as you know, each month with the user group, or potentially, if it's an in-person event, there may be presentations. So it may not be the entire slide deck. You may cut it down, for instance, but you may want to put that behind a gate. So it could be in the blog post, click here to access the presentation, and maybe you push them through a gate, Eloqua form, in order to get to a PDF, which is a reduced or cut down version of the slides that were delivered on the day, for example. Look, I think photos are a great thing to use as well. Photos from events, people love looking at photographs of themselves, right? Now, LinkedIn has done a great job over the last 12 months or so. I think you can add more photos and things now, which is kind of bad. It's been a while since we've done an in-person event and I've had to post any photographs, but my memory is that you can post more photographs. You probably, depending on the size of your organization, you may want to have some sort of legal thing at the registration point, letting people know that photographs will be taken, etc. And they should be able to object to that, I'm sure. But generally speaking, people love photographs of themselves and love sharing those and seeing who else was there and those sorts of things. So they can be good to help generate a little bit of traffic in that process. So whether it be on a blog post or in social sites or even dropping them into the relevant emails following the event. Again, people love photos. So any questions there at all? The Q&A, that one question from Mon. All right, let's jump in. So 20C. We covered most of this last month, but really just as a recap, there was some delay for pod 1 for anyone who was on pod 1. We're on pod 1, and I think that happens for us this coming weekend for some reason. Not sure why there was a delay, but most of you should be live and functioning with that one. The other update that we saw this month related to browsers. So there has been an update in relation to the preferred browsers. So we're now looking at Firefox 89 and Chrome release 91 or version 91. So they're your best choice browsers for use with Eloqua. I generally use more recent versions than these, and I don't typically have any issue with doing that. But just as an FYI, if you do have any issues, that's the first thing that my Oracle support will ask you is which version that you're running. So something for you to be aware of. Alrighty, so that brings us a little bit early today to the close for episode 2. Episode 3 is already in your diaries. So as long as you've used the add to calendar function, we look forward to seeing you in September. And then we need to start thinking fairly earnestly in relation to what will be, what is it, September, October? Yes, we have 2 more user groups after that for October and November. And then we're off for Christmas. But if you do have any questions, yeah, Justin, you'll find a summary of information contained in our blog. So if you go to our Marketing Cube blog, you'll see all of the past user groups there, and you'll find that information there. Thanks, Megan. No worries. You're welcome, Justin. Thanks, Hannah. Oh, Elise. Yeah, Elise is asking a question. I'm not sure if you're able to hang around for a bit, Elise. So in relation to managing capacity limits for events and wait lists, sure. So let me just see, are you still there on the line? Yes, you are. So at least there is a way that you can do that. Essentially what it is, I think from memory, we use a custom object along with a form to do some counting for you, essentially. So in a nutshell, what happens is you tell the custom object what a limit is for your event. So if you have, X number, let's say it's 100, for instance, then Eloqua will count every time a registration is submitted for that particular event. Once it reaches 100, it will then doesn't close down. We can't close down the registration, but it means that people can be redirected to a page that now basically says, instead of saying thank you for registering, it can say something to the effect of thank you for submitting your request to attend. Something like that. And so that can help manage wait lists. And then obviously there are comms, given the very nature of a wait list can only be serviced if somebody drops out. So that means you need to have communications in place where you request people to actually come back and confirm. So now it might be a week away from your event. So you need to encourage people to actually come back and confirm they're attending, or to let you know they're not attending. And if they're not attending, please click on this button. So if they then click on that button, then the list count goes down, which then frees up space, which enables the wait list communications to kick in. So we have a couple of clients who use this. It's a little bit of a proprietary process that Katika and the team have developed, and we've got a few customers in professional services who do use it and has sort of been using it for quite a while. So maybe Jason, if I could ask Jason to chase up with you, Elise, he can probably reach out to you and let you know as to what that looks like and how it could be managed. Yeah, the cancellation. Yeah, you're right, Elise. Yeah, totally. The cancellation then becomes more complex, but it can be managed. It can be managed, but it means that you've got to do a little bit more communicating with your audience and a little bit more pointed with the questions that you're asking them when they go through that process. No worries. All right, no worries, Elise. We'll have Jason reach out to you and schedule a time to chat. No problems at all. All righty. Well, thanks very much for attending, everybody. We really appreciate you making some time, and we'll see you next month for episode 3. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.